You didn't realize it all at once. There wasn't a dramatic ending, no final argument, no slammed door. It was quieter than that. It was the day you noticed how often you disappeared, just to keep the connection alive. You noticed how your voice softened when you actually wanted to speak clearly, how your needs became suggestions, then inconveniences, then things you stopped mentioning at all. You told yourself it was love. That compromise meant maturity. That sacrifice meant depth. That endurance meant devotion. But something inside you kept feeling thinner, not heartbroken, not angry, just less you. You were still present, still loyal, still trying, but you weren't fully alive in it anymore. And that's when it happened, the realization. Love shouldn't require self-erasure. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking in the wrong place, while abandoning yourself to stay chosen. That day wasn't loud. It was a subtle grief, the grief of recognizing how long you had been negotiating your identity for emotional safety. You began to see the pattern, how you adjusted faster than they reflected, how you explained yourself longer than they listened, how you forgave things you would never have done to them, not because you were weak, but because you were afraid that being fully yourself might cost you the relationship. That's the moment everything shifted. You realized love that demands self-abandonment isn't love, it's attachment. Attachment says, stay, even if it hurts. Love says, be whole, even if it's uncomfortable. You had confused endurance with intimacy. You had confused chemistry with compatibility. You had confused being needed with being cherished. And no one teaches you this early. They teach you to be accommodating, understanding, flexible. They don't teach you how to stay anchored while loving. So you learn the hard way, through exhaustion, through resentment you didn't want to admit, through the quiet panic of realizing you no longer recognized yourself. You weren't becoming distant. You were becoming aware. Aware that love shouldn't make you smaller. Aware that you shouldn't have to betray your intuition to maintain closeness. Aware that connection without self-respect always comes with a hidden cost. And that cost was you. That realization doesn't make you bitter. It makes you sober. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop chasing potential. You stop calling emotional unavailability a challenge you need to solve. You begin asking different questions. Not, do they want me? But, can I be myself here? Without shrinking. And that question changes everything. Because the moment you value your inner alignment more than external validation, your nervous system starts to calm. You no longer perform for love. You no longer audition for affection. You no longer abandon your boundaries to avoid abandonment. That's the day you realize love isn't proven by how much you tolerate. It's revealed by how safe you feel, being fully seen. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The day you realized love shouldn't cost you yourself didn't just change how you felt. It changed how you see. You started noticing things you used to excuse. The way your stomach tightened before difficult conversations. The way you rehearsed your needs so they wouldn't sound too much. The way relief washed over you when they were in a good mood. That wasn't love. That was hypervigilance. You were managing the emotional climate instead of living inside the relationship. Monitoring tone, facial expressions, response time, trying to prevent distance before it happened. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that connection could disappear if you were inconvenient. So you became easy, easy to adjust, easy to forgive, easy to overlook, but difficult to truly know. Because the real you was edited, trimmed down, polished, careful. You thought that was maturity, but it was fear. And once you saw that, you couldn't pretend anymore. You began asking yourself harder questions. Why do I feel anxious in moments that should feel safe? Why do I feel lonely while lying next to someone? Why do I feel more like myself when I'm alone than when I'm in love? Those questions don't come from drama. They come from awakening. You realized you were overfunctioning, carrying emotional weight. That wasn't yours. Initiating repair, initiating plans, initiating depth. While they contributed, just enough to keep you hopeful. And hope can be addictive, especially when it's attached to potential. You weren't in love with what was. You were in love with what could be. If they just healed, if they just opened up, if they just chose you the way you chose them. But that fantasy was costing you reality because while you waited for them to grow, you were shrinking. That's when your attachment style began to shift. You stopped chasing reassurance. You started observing consistency. You stopped interpreting mixed signals. You started believing patterns. You realized chemistry without emotional safety creates anxiety, not intimacy. Intensity is not depth. Hot and cold is not passion. Uncertainty is not romance. It's instability. And your nervous system was exhausted. So you did something radical. You paused. You stopped trying to prove your worth. You stopped explaining your value. You stopped fighting for reciprocity. And instead, you watched. Who leans in when you lean back? Who steps forward when you stop overextending? Who meets you without you lowering the bar? That's when clarity replaced confusion. Some people didn't move because they were comfortable with the version of you that carried everything. And when you stopped carrying, the connection felt heavier, not because you changed, but because you stopped compensating. And that's painful because it forces you to accept that some relationships only worked when you were overgiving. But here's the deeper shift. You stop seeing love as something you earn. You stop believing that if you just communicate better, love harder, understand deeper, you could secure someone's consistency. Love isn't secured through effort. It's revealed through alignment. You can't convince someone to meet you emotionally. You can only decide whether you'll stay when they don't. That's the part no one talks about. Walking away isn't always about anger. Sometimes it's about preservation, preserving your clarity, preserving your self-trust, preserving the version of you that no longer wants to disappear, to stay loved. And once you taste that self-respect, you can't go back to bargaining. You start noticing red flags faster, not because you're cynical, but because you're calibrated. You no longer confuse mystery with avoidance, independence with emotional distance, busy with unavailable. You want softness, consistency, mutual effort, and you're no longer ashamed for wanting that. Because the day you realized love shouldn't cost you yourself, you stop negotiating with people who require it to. This is where your standards rise, not from ego, but from experience. You felt what it's like to lose yourself in someone. You don't want that kind of intensity anymore. You want expansion. You want to feel more like yourself. Inside love, not less. And that shift changes who feels attracted to you. It changes who stays. It changes who leaves. Because when you stop abandoning yourself, you also stop attracting people who benefit from that abandonment. And that can feel lonely at first, but it's a clean loneliness, not the kind where you're lying next to someone feeling unseen. It's the kind where you're rebuilding, reclaiming, recentering. And this is where love starts looking different, quieter, healthier, less dramatic, more real. This is the part no one talks about, the aftermath. Because the day you realized love shouldn't cost you yourself wasn't just empowering, it was destabilizing. You didn't just lose a relationship. You lost the version of you that believed shrinking was noble. And that version of you had kept you safe for a long time. You used to anticipate moods, adjust tone, edit truth, delay needs. You called it being understanding, but it was hypervigilance. You called it being patient, but it was self-betrayal with good manners. And when you stopped doing that, everything felt unfamiliar. Silence felt louder. Space felt riskier. Boundaries felt aggressive. Because you were rewiring something deeper than habits. You were rewiring your nervous system. You see, when you're used to earning love by being low maintenance, soft spoken, endlessly accommodating, choosing yourself feels like rebellion. Not because it's wrong, but because it's new. There were moments you questioned yourself. Was I too rigid? Too distant? Too cold? But the truth was simpler. You were no longer overfunctioning to compensate for someone else's underfunctioning. And that shift changes relationship dynamics immediately. Some people lean in. They feel the steadiness. They respect the clarity. They meet you at your level. Others pull away because they were never attached to you. They were attached to your compliance. And that hurts in a different way, not because you miss them, but because you realize they never truly saw you. They saw what you provided: emotional labor, reassurance, flexibility, endless understanding. When that stopped, so did their effort. That's when it becomes undeniable. You weren't loved for who you were. You were valued for how well you adapted. And that's a painful awakening. But it's also freeing, because now you understand something powerful. The right love doesn't require performance. It doesn't require you to monitor your tone, or minimize your success, or dilute your standards. It doesn't punish you for clarity. It doesn't withdraw affection when you set limits. Healthy love doesn't feel like walking on emotional glass. It feels like standing on solid ground. And once you experience even a glimpse of that, you can't go back. You start noticing things you used to ignore. How someone responds to your no, how they handle disagreement, how they treat you when you're inconvenient. Because convenience is not intimacy, and access is not commitment. You no longer confuse intensity with depth. You no longer mistake pursuit for respect. And here's the real transformation. You stop chasing people who require you to disappear, not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself more. That's not arrogance. That's integration. You've integrated the part of you that used to fear being too much. You've integrated the part of you that thought love had to be earned through exhaustion. Now you understand. If being fully yourself drives someone away, they were only in love with your mask, and you're done wearing it. You feel calmer now, less frantic, less attached to outcomes. You don't need constant reassurance because you're no longer abandoning yourself to secure it. There's a quiet power in that, a grounded presence, a steadiness that doesn't beg to be chosen. You become selective, not guarded. Selective because your time, your energy, your heart, they're no longer negotiable. And that's when something unexpected happens. You start attracting differently, not because you changed your personality, but because you stopped betraying it. The people who stay now stay for the real you, the steady you, the clear you, the unedited you. And if someone leaves, you don't crumble. You recalibrate because you've already survived losing yourself once. You won't volunteer for it again. This is maturity, not the kind that tolerates anything, but the kind that understands love should feel expansive, not diminishing. And you finally know the difference. This is where it becomes embodied, not just understood, lived, because real transformation isn't the moment you realize something. It's the moment you refuse to go back. And now, you don't go back. You don't over-explain your boundaries. You don't shrink your standards to avoid conflict. You don't translate your needs into something easier to digest. You say it clearly, and you let the response reveal everything. That's the shift. You no longer chase reassurance. You observe consistency. You no longer panic. When someone pulls away, you assess whether they were ever aligned. You no longer confuse attention with care because you felt what it costs to accept crumbs. And here's what's powerful. When you stop abandoning yourself, you stop attracting people who require that version of you. Your energy changes. It becomes grounded, measured, unapologetic. You're softer, but not porous. You're open, but not unguarded. You're loving, but not self-erasing. And people feel that. The emotionally unavailable feel uncomfortable. The inconsistent feel exposed. The avoidant feel challenged. Because your presence now demands reciprocity, not performance. You no longer negotiate respect. You expect it. And the right person? They don't feel threatened by your clarity. They feel safe in it. They don't require you to dim your voice. They lean closer when you speak. They don't see your boundaries as rejection. They see them as self-awareness. That's the difference. Love stops feeling like survival. It starts feeling like expansion. You laugh more. You relax more. You stop analyzing every message. You're no longer hyper-aware of every shift in tone. Because healthy love doesn't weaponize silence. It communicates. It reassures. It remains. And if someone cannot meet that level, you don't fight for their potential. You release them with clarity because you finally understand. The cost of losing yourself is higher than the cost of losing anyone else. That's the day you realized love shouldn't cost you yourself, not your voice, not your standards, not your identity, not your peace. And now, you move differently. You choose slowly. You trust patterns over promises. You prioritize alignment over chemistry. You're no longer impressed by intensity. You're anchored in consistency. And that is powerful, because when you stop offering pieces of yourself just to be kept, you become someone who cannot be half loved. You become someone who either receives depth or walks away calmly, without drama, without revenge, without trying to prove anything. Just clarity. And clarity is magnetic. The next love you experience will not feel like something you have to survive. It will feel like something you can grow inside, because you didn't just change who you choose. You changed who you are willing to be inside love. And that changes everything. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt yourself shrinking to stay loved, if you've ever confused endurance with intimacy, then this message was meant to find you. Don't just watch. Integrate it. Start noticing where you still negotiate yourself. Start asking whether the connection allows you to stay whole. And if you're ready to experience love, that expands you instead of diminishes you. Stay here. Subscribe. Because we don't just talk about relationships here. We talk about self-respect, attachment patterns, emotional intelligence, and becoming the version of you that no longer settles for emotionally expensive love. Comment below. What was the moment you realized love shouldn't cost you yourself? Your awareness might be the permission someone else needs. And if this gave you clarity, share it with someone who's still shrinking to be chosen. You don't lose love by choosing yourself. You lose illusions. And that's where real love begins.